Do not forget, you can support the channel with a like, and you can also subscribe to be aware of the latest published videos. Thank you. We hope that here you can find the latest news, ideas, and discoveries from the scientific world.
In 1964, a homesick teenager mailed himself back home in a wooden box. The 9,608-mile journey from Australia to Wales didn't quite go to plan. Package. In late 1964, Welshman Brian Robson arrived in Melbourne, Australia to embark on an adventure of sorts. 19-year-old Brian was part of an assisted immigration program working for Victorian Railways. Upon arrival, he took a job working as a railway ticket clerk, but it was a position the teen found boring and lonely. Despite having relatives in the country, his increasing homesickness showed no sign of abating. Australia was a complete shock to my system. I found it very difficult and thought from the moment I got there I wanted to get out as quickly as possible. Brian was desperate to return home to Wales, but quitting his job wasn't an option. A contract with the Australian government required the teen to stay and work for 2 years. If he broke the contract, he would have to pay back the money his host country had already spent on him, which was £700. Brian's monthly wage was £40. When a relative suggested he stow away on a ship returning to the UK, Brian decided to take his chances. Using a visitor pass to gain access, he boarded the ship and then hid when it set sail. Just hours into the voyage, Brian was overcome with violent seasickness and forced to make his way to seek medical attention. He was dropped off in New Zealand and made to return to Australia. Incredibly, the Welshman's failed escape had left him only more determined to find a way home. Soon after his return, Brian read the story of Australian javelin thrower Reg Spears, who had recently found himself stranded in the UK after failing to make the Australian Olympics team. Penniless and desperate to return home for his daughter's first birthday, Reg had successfully mailed himself home in a wooden box. From the moment I read it in the newspaper, I convinced myself I had no choice. That's what I had to do. With Reg as inspiration, Brian was able to persuade 2 work friends to help him devise a scheme to mail himself back home. Together, the men purchased a crate from a builder's merchant and made contact with Qantas, who he convinced with a story of needing to ship a computer back to the UK via air freight for maintenance and servicing. With a forged invoice from friends and an agreement with Qantas for cash on delivery, Brian finalized his plans. The crate in which he traveled was strengthened and fitted with a harness to hold him in place. He took a pair of pliers with him to pull out the nails on arrival. As well as a suitcase, he took 2 pillows and 2 bottles, one for water and one for urine. The first leg of Brian's journey went smoothly, although he quickly realized he had underestimated the space he required. I could fit in there okay as long as I sat down with my knees pressed up in my chest. My back was to the suitcase. It was quite large, which obviously reduced my movements inside even more. I couldn't stretch my legs and I couldn't turn around. I was more or less stuck in that position, which at first was quite comfy but later proved not so sensible. On arrival in Sydney, to Brian's horror, the crate was placed upside down on the tarmac. They left me on the tarmac, but I was dumped upside down. I was strapped and standing on my head. I tried to turn around, but there wasn't enough space. It was impossible. It becomes painful very quickly, throbbing in your neck and the top of your head. Your neck is taking all the weight, so it becomes excruciatingly painful. The blood is rushing to your head. You get blackouts. I was in serious pain. After 22 hours, the crate was moved to another aircraft and thankfully placed the right way up. If the first leg of the journey had been bad, it was about to get worse. Unknown to Brian, the Qantas flight was full, so his crate was instead loaded onto a Pan-American aircraft. The hold was unheated and the teenager found himself in a dangerous situation as he slipped in and out of consciousness. I had difficulty breathing and I started to get pain in my elbows and knees. Slowly, just about every joint in my body started aching. They were swelling, my ankles were swelling really badly. When the plane touched down, with Brian miraculously still alive, he attempted to check the time and date on his watch, sure he must by now be on home ground. After dropping his torch, Brian realized he was unable to retrieve it. It sat at the bottom of the crate, the beam still shining. What seemed disastrous would prove to be Brian's saving grace. Thankfully, freight handler Gary Hatch spotted the torchlight shining through a gap in the crate and decided to investigate further. After breaking a hole in the box, he saw what he believed to be a dead body. When customs officers, doctors, and police arrived at the scene, the box was opened properly and the stowaway was revealed. It took 3 or 4 of them to take me out of the crate, and as they laid me on my back, my legs stayed in the same position as when I was sitting in the crate. They forced my legs down and my body came up. Of course, between them they held me down and straightened my legs, and then they took me to hospital. But Brian's ordeal was still not over, a realization that came when he noticed the officials were speaking with American accents. The plane had taken a different route, via Los Angeles, and the man now being treated in hospital had some serious explaining to do to the FBI. Brian was able to successfully convince the FBI that he wasn't a spy, but rather a homesick Welshman desperate to return to the UK. With growing publicity, the American authorities decided they wouldn't press charges. Essentially, the responsibility for stowaways lies with the airline that carries them, so Brian's fate was in the hands of Pan American. Instead of sending their illegal passenger back to Australia, the airline instead decided to send him back to London. After 4 days in a crate, in which Brian would likely have frozen to death on the final flight if he hadn't been discovered in Los Angeles, Pan American returned him home. They upgraded him to first class. Back on Welsh soil, Brian enjoyed a brief spell of fame before leaving his home city of Cardiff to set up a string of retail businesses. He later returned to Australia, but just for a holiday, and this time traveling as a conventional passenger. In 2015, at the age of 70, Brian reflected on his almost fatal adventure in his memoir, The Great Escape. On reflection, kids don't think straight. I think most teenagers, youth of those days and certainly of these, make their mind up to do something and don't think of the consequences. It was a pretty dangerous thing, but did I ever think of giving up? Absolutely not. That was the last thing that went through my mind.